So good morning to you guys once again. And in this session, we're going to discuss about multiple applications, multiple form applications on Java forms. And I will also show you auxiliary classes, which is our next chapter in the course. And from there, we will move into a couple of other chapters like object-oriented specific terms, encapsulation, inheritance, polymorphism, abstract classes, and that's where the lecture will end. So we will cover today chapter 6 and then a little bit of chapter 7. So in order to cover these chapters, we have to know how to create forms, and we have seen that in the past lectures. And what we're going to do now, in the previous applications, we were only using one form to basically dominate the entire application. So there was an application class and then a regular concurrent class, which was basically communicating with one another to run it. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to create two classes where they will be able to communicate with within themselves, and you can also control them from an application class. So that is the focus of what we're going to do today. So I'm going to go back to the application that we were using. I was using NetBeans for this, and I'm going to create a form. This one, I'm just going to call it form 1, just to show you how you can create multiple forms and play around with them. Having done so, we need to change some of the properties of this specific class just to make it a JFrame. So we have done this several times, so I'm not going to waste my time basically copy pasting the entire statements. So I'm just going to go there and put them in here. It will extend the JFrame, obviously. Extend. And of course, we will also need to have a public form, which is the name of the class in this case. And any properties inside should be defined there. You can go again and set them up from the previous exercises that we have done in this course, such as the size, the layout, location, visibility, so forth. So the title is something I'm going to change in here and call it form 1. Now this will create me, the constructor will create me the actual form, the JFrame form. But what we need now is a couple of components inside so that this is going to work. So I'm going to go in there and find a form, not this one, the GUI form. And let's say we want to copy anything there, like asking a user their name or something else, doesn't really matter. I'm gonna copy paste all these lines in here and slightly change them. So the output label, I'm just gonna remove it. So I have an info label, which is basically asking a user their name and surname, whatever name text is there, the submit button, and a clear button. And going into the first form, we're going to look into how we can put them into the form itself. So I'm just going to put it there, all of them, to make sure that they are added. And the output one, I'm going to remove. Not going to be there. Now, in order to make the buttons work, such as with the action listener, we need to obviously implement the action listener. That's going to be action listener. And as soon as you do this, the class will not understand the method that it applies. So you can go there, press on Alt Enter, and say implement all abstract methods, which is going to implement the action performed. So if you go down, you'll see the action performed. It throws an exception. You don't need that. Even the comment is telling you that you don't need that. It says to change the body of generated method, choose whatever. So we don't need this now. So I'm going to remove it. Now, when I save the application, you will see that all the properties in the form are more or less like in the first form that we created in the previous lecture. And if I try to run this thing, it won't run, which is another issue that you should know. That is because this class does not have a main method. Remember that in an application, usually an external class will be an application class, which then will dominate to your concurrent classes. This is an ideal way to run the program. So you can make an external class here, such as main, for example, and then just create the object from here rather than inside the form itself. So this can be, oops, this can be form one, start form, whatever, yeah, or you can also call it form one and new form one. I would prefer to make the forms visible from here, to be honest. You can set up set visible from here. It makes more sense to me that wherever I create the constructor, wherever I create the object, I make there that the form is visible. But technically, if you go back and type set visible here, this is also true. It's not like it's wrong. It's just another way of doing it. So I'm going to remove this part. And when I come to the main now and run it, you see that my form one is there asking me a name and surname. And I can do a submit operation and I can do a clear operation, which are currently empty. In a previous exercise, when you submitted this, you basically showed your name, your gender, whatever in here on the same form. What we're gonna do now is to do this stuff in another form. So it's not gonna be on the same form now, it's gonna display this on another form. And we're gonna create that form as well. So I'm gonna close all these windows that I don't need right now and create another form just underneath it. A nice way of creating this form is to basically duplicating this. So you can copy an entire form, as you can see, and just go there and paste it. And you can say refactor copy. Instead of putting it form one, we're gonna say it's form two and refactor it. And as you can see, it's just copy and pasted it down there. So it's exactly the same form, but we're gonna change it a little bit. Do you have anything you don't understand so far? Can you please either speak or write onto the chat part so I can see if you have anything you don't understand? Hello, guys. Are you there? Very good. Now I'm gonna go in here and change the properties for this form. In this one, I'm just gonna keep one button and call it back button, and just call it back. And up there, I'm just gonna put in, just like in the previous example, an info label. This is where the name is visible. And that's it. I'm not going to put anything else. And info label will be there with a back button. And we're going to add the same features as we did before with the back button. Now, what I want to do here is that I want to manipulate this in a way that whenever the user submits the form for mom, all this action about the name, surname, whatsoever comes and being displayed in form 2, and from form 2 they can go back, which is going to be basically your next assignment. And I'm going to announce this assignment this week, giving you again around 2 weeks time to finish it. So how do we do this? We already added submit button and clear button. So we're going to come in here, say something like, if, let's change this to action dot get source equals to submit button. Now, if the action is coming from the submit button, and there's also the action, you can put the action to the clear button. I'm going to do the clear part first because it's much easier. I'm going to say something like name text dot set text, just set it to empty, which is what the clear does in this case. For the submit button, we first going to check if the name text dot get text dot length is actually less than 1. This means that if the length of the entered field is basically 0, less than 1 is 0, it means that the user did not type anything inside, and hence we're going to throw an error message. So I'm going to say something like JOption pane, show message dialog, could be this, and we're going to say please enter your name. We can display the error. We can even set an error message format. Error message. So I'm going to take this down so it can be more visible. Now that this part is done, we can put the else part. And this is the part that is different from all the other applications we have done so far, because, you know, action performed is something that we typed before, but we didn't actually allow action performed to go to another form, which is where this application is going to differ from all the others. What we're going to do in here is that we're going to pass to another form. And we can do that by creating another object for that form, just like the way that we created this. So whenever you created an object for the form class, form1 class, you actually activated the properties, and that is an object. So what we know from all this exercise is that a class is a template. It actually structures what we're going to put inside, but some of these features are not very specific. They're not really defined there because it's an abstract definition for it. Just like the concept of car. Whenever we talk about a car, we know that it's a vehicle, we know that it's 4 wheels, we know that it has a gearbox, an engine, doors, seats. So there is a concept in your mind what a car is. But when I say a car, You don't know which car that I'm talking about. It could be a Honda, it could be a Mercedes, an Opel, Ford. You know, there are so many different car brands out there, and I'm not specifically telling you which car it is. I'm just telling you that it is a car. So this is the same as a class and an object. So you can think of the class itself as a car, the concept of car. So you have all these properties here in the form that basically makes up that concept, such as in this case, I have the title, layout, you know, all these form components, but I do not specify it, which form it is. You know, just the form one is the name, but as long as I do not create it as an object, I don't know which one it is, just because you can have multiple form ones. But whenever I create this one, now I have something more specific, like a Honda, like Ford, like Mercedes. So you just name the car now. And that is the difference between an object and a class. A class is a template uh, and a blueprint. An object is a blueprint. It's kind of like what it is an instance where it is creating an instance of that class to do something specific. And knowing this concept now, you can basically create another one, another object inside this point. So all you have to do is to copy paste these lines from your main application. And instead of form 1, we're going to call it form 2. And this will be form 2. Now, as you create the object, you can set up its features. Normally, this breaks the rule of encapsulation because you should never directly access to the variables of any class. But in this case, whenever I created form 2, I did not specify the modifiers for these two specific JLabel and JButton. And whenever you don't type anything in front of them, they are automatically public. Even if you do not type this in front of them, the compiler accepts them as public. Now, making objects or variables public is not a good practice in object-oriented programming because you allow external classes to access them and change their state. And in a big program, this can be a tedious experience. It could be very, very difficult to follow which class is accessing to the state, what it is doing, and so forth. But since this is a simple example, we're going to break the rules for the encapsulation. And just to show you, I can access the state of a particular object here. All I have to type is the name of that specific object. In this case, I have, for example, an info label. I can come here into the form 2 and just type info label. As soon as I do this, as you can see, I can access to the state. And now from outside that class, I'm not even inside, as you can see, I'm outside and I can access to the properties. I can set up the text inside as the name text dot get text, which is the one that the user typed in here. And when I display this, that information will be displayed inside form 2. So we have done the exercise. We basically created another form 2, and then we can set up the name and we display it. What about form 2 then? Whenever it is pressed on back button, what does it do? Well, you have to first set up the info label into its original text. So I'm going to put set text and set up the original text. This is where the name is visible. And I'm going to use exactly the same statement as form 1. So basically this time around, we want this form to go back to form 1. So I'm going to put form 1, add form, new form 1, and also form 1 visible, which will allow us to create another form. Let's try to run this application to see what it does. So at the beginning of the application, you see user asking you name and surname. I'm going to type nothing, actually, not going to type anything, and just press on submit, and it says, please enter your name. This is the error message that we created on here. So if the actual name get length, name text dot get text dot length is less than 1, it will display you enter your name. Let's make it surname. Enter your name and surname. So running this now again, if I don't type anything, it will say enter your name and surname. Now I can come in here and type my name and surname. And whenever I press on submit, it goes to another form. We need to change its name, but it goes to another form and it displays there. Whenever I say back, it goes back to the original form. There are a couple of problems here. The first one, that I forgot to change the name of form 2, so it is still saying form 1. The second one is, whenever you go to the next form, you don't close the first form. So it could be a good idea that when you go to the next form, you close or hide the first form. So we can do that by setting this set visible box. And we're gonna go to form 2 and do the same thing. This one is gonna be form 2. Now whenever I display form 1, this set visible. Now I think this will work better. So you have your name and surname, submitting it. Nothing is there. We go there and type your name and surname. Submit, and now you see the form 2 text is visible and form 1 is gone. And my name actually displayed on form 2. Okay, so I managed to carry data from form 1 to form 2. It is possible for me to carry the data from form 1 to form 2. So this is form 1 where we got the data and it carried to form 2. This is called multiple forms, and you can use as many forms as you like in the application. And whenever I wanted to create form 2, I just use the constructor. In the form 2, whenever the user pressed on back, it goes back to the original form. So I'm going to press on back, it goes back to the original form, which is form 1. So you can type something here, display, go back, display, go back. Okay, that is the fundamentals about multiple forms. Now I'm gonna stop here, and if you have any questions, I will answer them. Can you follow? Can you all please respond on the chat screen if you have any questions? Cool. So far, we created the multiple form exercise with only text box, as you can see. We just use a text box, which is text field, sorry, which is name text. I'm going to show you another form component just to show you that you can carry other data as well. It doesn't have to be a text data. It could be a radio button, whatsoever. We have done exercises about radio buttons, I think. So I'm going to find a exercise about radio button. Then just copy and paste them into my form 1. So coming down here, I have gonna have 3 radio buttons. And I'm just gonna call this male radio, female radio, and I'm just gonna call this other radio. This one would be male, female, other. And button group will be gender group. So it's gonna be male, female, and other. Now that I have done this, I'm gonna add them to the form itself. You can make the fonts like in the previous exercises. You can define fonts, you can define colors if you want to. I'm not gonna do any of that, but rather I'm gonna directly add these to the form. First thing we have to do though, to add them to the group. So whenever you create a group, you have to first add them there to make sure that they are added to the group. So I'm going to go back to my application, and inside form, anywhere, doesn't really matter where, first add them into the group. So gender group dot add. This is going to be male, female, other. Now that you added them, you can add a label here, new J label, and tell the user what to do. Please select your gender. And now we know that the user is going to select it. We can type them one by one. This is going to be male, female, other. Let's see how this is going to look. So I'm going to run this first application just to see if it's going to be visible there. It's not bad. Maybe we can do it slightly small, but it says please select your gender, male, female, other. And I can select, as you can see, only one. So I can be a male, I can be a female, or I can be other. But I can't be all at the same time. So that works for me. I'm going to go back to form 1. Slightly reduce the size of the X one just to see that it's going to fit to the entire screen, which it does. Perfect. And we're going to go back to form 1 to get the value. Now, for the first one, we did the name text. So we were checking it. Now, this time you can put an else if and then check the state of the buttons. If male radio is selected equals to false, and female radio is selected equals to false. So we did that one too. And I'm going to put one more. And other radio is selected false. So this means that every one of them is false. Then it means the user did not select any one of them. So we're going to put this and take up this entire thing into brackets. And now that the user did not select any of them, we can put a J option pane message here. Just we did as with the previous one, and we're going to select something like please select your gender. You see how step by step I'm doing it. So it's like in the first one, I added these into the button group, then added them into the form. Now I'm checking the error message part. So this is how you should deal with your application, step by step. Now I can type my name. Whenever I submit, it says, please select your gender. I can select my gender, which then shows my name, but not the gender, which is going to be the next part that we do. Now that we selected it, we need to decide which one is actually selected. So you can come in here into the else part, and you can decide which one is selected. We can put male radio again is selected. And I'm going to create a variable called in here gender, initially empty. If male radio is selected, the gender would be male. Else if female radio is selected, this would be female. And we're going to do an else if again. If other radio is selected, this would be other. So male, female, or other. Now that we have done this, we know which gender it is, and now we can pass it there. So all we need to do is to show this on the label, on the info label. So we can even modify the state of this. We can say something like, hello, this person, whatever your name is, and we can put something like \n. You define, let's put it down there, you define yourself as whatever gender is there. You can define yourself as a male, a female, or as other. And then we show it. So let's see how this is going to look. We're going to go in there, enter your name. I'm going to enter my name. I define myself as male. So I'm going to submit it, and it says, hello, this person, you define yourself as male. And you can go back, type completely something else. And let's type Susan, female. Hello, Susan, you define yourself as female. And we go back there. J, other. Submit. Hello, J, you define yourself as other. So it works. As you can see, it doesn't need to be a name tags or any form component can be transferred. The underlying logic is that once you define the properties, you add the form component here, make sure that it is validated, and once it's validated, you can define the value and you pass that value inside the new form component. So it takes a while the first time around you do this, but then it's very straightforward. And I think I finished the multiple form parts. So we have seen how to create forms. You can also see more exercises or more stuff on multiple form components. You can see it in there that, you know, one form component is being opened, open new form, close, open new form, close, so forth. So this one is like disposing the form itself whenever the form is open, and it's showing you how to create the form. So basically when you create the constructor, it opens up the new form. Any questions up to this point? Okay, so everything is absolutely clear. You understand it. Good job. One of the things that I like to show you in today's exercise is called encapsulation. Now, when we go to this part, when we wanted to basically modify the state of info label, we said that in order to do that, this label itself must be public. But technically, when you write your variables, these should never be public. And the reason is because you make these values very, very vulnerable because their state can be changed from outside. So normally when you write something, unless there's a specific reason, the variables or the object themselves is always private. If there's a child class, your classes can have child classes, then it can be protected. But usually 90% of the time, these values should be private, not public. And when you don't type in front of them, it is actually public. So if you leave it like this, the compiler accepts them as if they are public. But this is a bad practice. The reason why we define them as private is because we don't want their state to be modified from outside, like what we did in Form 1. We don't want that because we want to have some sort of control over the application that not any form can go and change its state. Okay? This is a very important thing because it keeps the program compact. Because now that we cannot access to the state of that specific variable directly, how do we transfer the values then? Well, you then use what we call as get and set methods, which is the core idea behind encapsulation. And what it does is that whenever you set a value, you change the value of a specific variable in another class. And when you get it, you get the value of another variable or an object or an array, whatever that is, and you return the latest result of it. So it kind of like puts a generic template into that class so that you have to use that specific method in order to change the value. And that's what I'm going to do in here. Instead of directly allowing the info label to be changed, I am going to come in here and type a get and a set method. I think you can do this actually almost in every single IDE nowadays, setting up getter and setters. But on NetBeans, I'm not quite sure how to do it. So maybe we can write them, of course, manually, but most IDEs provide some sort of template for them so that you can automatically add it. I know IntelliJ does it, so it's it's insert code. You see getter and setter option. So if you go there into the value, just select insert code, getter and setter, and you can now select for which one you want to put it. Now I only want to put it for JLabel, and if you generate it, it actually puts getter and setter methods automatically. It's in here, as you can see, get info label, which returns the label itself, and set info label, whatever. So I'm gonna call this get info label text because I want text data to be transferred. So I'm gonna put the string and return info label dot get text. You can also convert it to string if you want, but this is optional. And for the set info label text, instead of JLabel, I'm gonna accept string one. And this should be set text and info label, whatever info label is there. You can also call it info instead of label. Just call it info, and that should be fine. Now you can add the setters and getters to anywhere. It doesn't even have to be in the variable part. You can go down, add it after the constructor, before the constructor. after the action performed, before the action performed. It doesn't matter where you add them. As long as it's there, it will do the job. Now, going back to the application, we cannot handle this now directly. What we are forced to do is to use that specific method. And I'm going to cut this part and use that specific method now. Whenever I say form2, now I can use set info label text. And I'm going to set this up. So all that information goes into the method itself now, rather than directly setting it inside the label. Use a specific method which makes this thing, accessible to other classes, and then you can pass the information. It achieves the same outcome, but with a more object-oriented way. So let's submit this, your name and surname. Mail. And as you can see, the outcome did not change. This is a much better way to run the programs. And these methods are called getter and setter. The get method will allow you to get the current state of that whatever object it is. It can be an object, it can be a variable, it can be an array, it can be a collection, it can be a map. Whatever that is, it will get the current state and return the one. The set one, on the other hand, will set the value of that specific whatever that is. So it will change the value, okay? And get and set methods are used especially in multiple forms and auxiliary classes as well, so that you can transfer one data to another. It is an ideal way to pass information from one form to the other. So instead of directly modifying the name and surname, labels, whatever directly, what you need to do is to pass the get and set methods. And that's it. That's all I want to talk about multiple forms. Do you have any questions so far? This is a very nice exercise. I encourage you to complete it. Some parts of it I already did, such as the name and the gender. You can put, for example, on your own time, and basically a combo box, check boxes, and make sure to transfer the values from one form to the other. So you can put all this information into form 1, name, surname, gender, country, hobbies, and the next form, which is going to be form 2, all that information is being displayed. Now, you don't have any questions, so I'm going to pass into the next subject, which is called auxiliary classes. Now, auxiliary classes is a term that we use when we want to divide the interface, the user interface, from the business style. Now, generally speaking, auxiliary class is considered as a bad practice in programming. And the reason is because you basically put a class inside another class without making it, on a different file, which then kind of like prevents you to access to some certain objects, or like structurally, it's not an ideal way to represent it. So basically in Java and in many other object-oriented languages, it is possible to create a class inside another class. So you can have, for example, form 1, and inside form 1, you can have form 2. But this is not a very good way to structure. This is why, unless the second class is going to do something really small, it is not something that we prefer to do. It can be very useful when you want to deal with parallel programming, such as when you want to, for example, create threads, and one thread is basically listening another, and so forth. In that regard, it could be useful. But if you are trying to structure your work, like what we do in here, where you have form 1, form 2, and they're communicating to one another, and they are actually not small classes, as you can see, then they should be placed in different kind of files. They shouldn't be on the same file because it makes it much more difficult for the readability purposes. However, auxiliary classes has their own use, and we should be aware of them. One of the things that you should know about auxiliary classes is that auxiliary class can't be public, and it is not visible outside of that specific class, which is a very bad thing. So if you want the class to has its own identity, to be, accessible and do certain things, then you should make it on a separate file and not allow it to be embedded into another class. This is why it's not really suggested to create auxiliary classes unless they are going to do something very specific and very small for the the original class that you create. Another important issue in here is that how we separate these classes from how you display the interface, which is an ideal way, again, in object-oriented programming, that you have to separate the display of information from how it is processed. In modern programming, this is called model view controller. It's called MVC. And if you look at most of the web applications that designed today, or the mobile applications, you will realize that many of them are using this specific architecture, software architecture, to be designed. And it is important to keep this up because when you go to the industry after your graduation, many companies will tell you, do you know about MVC? And you have to program in that specific way because the access to information now is done through many devices. It is possible to access the same website from a mobile phone, from a smart device like a smartwatch or a tablet device, or from a regular computer. So according to the access device, the website has to shrink or adjust itself. It has to be responsive. This is why MVC is a very important issue. The way that you process the information should be different than the way that you display it. One way of achieving this in the desktop environment is that we can use a layered architecture, which means that you have separate layers to do that information. Like in one layer, you only focus on displaying the data. In another layer, you only focus on processing that specific data. So you kind of like group your classes to a specific part so that they can focus on their own thing. This also allows the programs to be divided. So whenever a group project is given to you, for example, one member can only focus on the user interface, and another member can only focus on how data is processed, and a third member, for example, can deal with the database part. It allows you to more specifically focusing on one aspect of the generic, of the overall program. So here is a demonstration of how this is displayed. At the top, you have your user interface, which is the interactions, where the interactions are done and where the user sees the information. In the middle tier, you have the business logic, which is the process of information. And finally, in the data tier, you can store the data, not necessarily to a database. It can be a file, it can be a JSON, can be a text file, can be an XML file. So it doesn't have to be a database, but some sort of persistency is can be provided here. So we're gonna do an exercise about auxiliary classes just to show you how this can be done in the Java environment. And the exercise that we're gonna do is called the fee calculation exercise, which is the one that I'm going to complete in here. Just to show you, there's a huge detail about it. We're going to create two classes, basically. One is called the fee GUI, which is where the GUI information will be displayed, such as these form components where the user asks the name, radio buttons, the courses, and the overall fee is calculated there, and they can clear it. And in another application, what we're going to do is in another class is the actual calculation of this. All these components and details are given to you in your slide. So if you go down, you will see how this is basically divided. And every single information is given in here as well. So let's get design this first and see how you can break up this information. So you can divide them into classes. So I'm going to create a new class and call this fees GUI. I want to design the GUI as quickly as possible. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy paste many of the features that I already did in the previous exercises, such as labels, buttons, so forth. For this specific exercise, just copy this. I need these import statements. I need to have a label, text field, buttons. Their names will change, but these are the components that I need. So looking into the design, I need to have a name, a text field, home, overseas. So I'm going to delete this info label and define it in the design. The name text can be name text, doesn't matter. The radio buttons can be now, they have to be changed to home and overseas. So this one is home radio. That one is overseas radio. So it's going to be home, overseas. We need to have a private button group for the radio group, right? New button group. And underneath we have number of courses and another text field and then another text field. So we can put it in here. The third text field is number of courses. So call it number of courses text. And this one is, I think, only 3. And finally the fees. So you can copy paste this again and call it fees text. And that one is like, I don't know, 15 maybe, quite big. So we're gonna put it there. And we have 2 buttons. So we can copy paste the buttons from here as well. There you go. All the form components are there that we need to use. All of them are represented. Now we have a constructor. We're gonna copy paste this. Our constructor name is not formando, so make sure to use exactly the name as the class file, which in this case is the fees GUI. And now we have to design this. Now you can design it just by looking at the background. First you have to add a label, then a field. So just add them one by one. You can put a new J label. You can put name. 20 is too big for this. Let's add it up just to see how it's going to look. Next, make this 15. Now, first one is done. Underneath, we have home and overseas. So we need to add first them to the button group. So type button group dot, oh, it's radio group, I think, sorry. It's radio group, not button group. Add radio overseas radio. And we're going to do the same thing for home radio. Now we added them both. So we designed the entire applications radio buttons in here. And now that these are ready, you can add them to the form. So add home radio, add overseas radio. Now at some point I like to stop and see how is this gonna look. So we can come in here, we can create them main methods inside here just to quickly see how this is gonna look. So I'm gonna copy paste the main method in GUI's form. Anywhere in the program, doesn't really matter. And I'm going to use the same technique as I did in the previous. So fees GUI, my program, you can call it that, new fees GUI. And my program set visible is going to be true. This one I'm just going to change it to fees GUI. Now that because you have a main method here, now you can directly run the program. You don't need to rely on an external class. And as you can see, it shows in there. Maybe we can make it the form slightly smaller so it will look better. Like this. Even more so. So fees GUI, yeah, it looks nice now. So there's the home and there's the overseas. We go back to the application. What's the next one that we have to do? Number of courses. So we can come in here, add a new label, just call it number of courses. Underneath that, we have the number of courses here, number of courses text. Just add here. Number. Now that we have this, we're gonna add the next one, which is fees. So I'm gonna come in there and new J label. I call it total fields and just show that. In this case, the fees itself are displayed in fees text. And more or less this is ready now. Let's see how it looks. So we have number of courses, can be like down there. So number of courses taken, total fees. Want it to be like that, yes. I'm gonna leave some space here just to make sure this looks nice. Just pushes it down. So we can use an actual panel to make this work structured if you want. So let's use a panel because it's bothering me, and we will have another reason to learn how panels work. So let's create a panel, jpanel, call it panel 1, new jpanel. Whenever you define a panel, it is a good idea to structure the work instead of putting everything in there. You can add them into the panel itself, like panel 1, add this. It will look much better when you do it that way, instead of like these components like sliding. You can add them to the panel and it might look better. You can even define the panel size if you want to, such as panel 1, set dimensions, set preferred size, new dimension, and make it smaller than this size. So it can be 300 and I don't know, 100. That's the not bad. At least it's placed there, and we just need to reduce the size of it. But basically, the panel solved my problems, which looks nice now. And I'm just gonna make this not 100 but 25 or something. So it's like kind of like all these. If you cannot arrange the components as you like the way that I try to arrange them, and it doesn't fit there for some reason, you can basically use a panel to make sure that these are fixated on their own location, like this. You see, it looks much better now because I put them into a panel. And you can create as many panels as you like. You're not limited to create 1 or 2. I just used 1 in here because it was bothering me. So I used 1 to make sure that the work is, looking nice on the screen. And let's make it in terms of dollar as well. So basically, the GUI that we created is finished. It is more or less like the same GUI given in the question. There's a name up there. It asks you a name. And look at the one that we created. There's a home and overseas status, number of courses taken, and fees. I just need to put the buttons there. So I need to add the buttons somewhere in the program. So we're gonna go back. We have the buttons, we just need to add them. I'm gonna add them after the text field. So submit button here, submit button, and a clear button. All these are added. Is it clear? Yeah, it's clear. So let's see again. Yeah, it looks really nice. It's very tidy and nice. Cool. We finished the design. So we need to make this work now. Remember that in order to activate the buttons themselves, first you need to make sure that it implements the action listener. So we're going to come in here, make sure that the action listener is there. And as soon as you do this, you can press on Alt Enter, as I told you several times, and put the action perform method. Now in the action perform method, you need to make sure which action you are using. Is this either coming from the clear or from another one? So you can put the submit, and you can put an else if, put a clear here. You put an else if, and say clear button. The clear is usually easy. So all you have to do is to clear the entire form. And we have certain components that you can clear. If you run the application, you will see that we have to clear this, 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 and that. So 4 components have to be cleared and can be done straight away. We know that these components are name text. So name text dot set text. Just put empty inside. Make sure that the home radio is selected, is false. This is, I think, set selected. Yes, false. Overseas radio set selected is false. And we also have number of courses. Number of courses. I forgot its name. So if you forget its name, you can just type it like that. Number of courses text. Set. Why is it number of courses text? Doesn't make any sense, but hey, I use that name, so I'm gonna stick to it. Set text. And the final one is fees text dot set text. So I forgot their name usually because I have a fish memory. So if you basically want to type the name of it, just type this, and when you type this, it lists you the entire variable, so you can see it up from the list and select it like that. You know, it's a good practice. Other than that, this doesn't have any other feature. Okay, it doesn't matter if you write it or not. So even if I delete this, no difference is made. All right. So I managed to clear everything in here. What I want to do at this point is to somehow calculate this. And the calculation is going to be done in another class, which we're going to call it like an auxiliary class. We're going to do it in another class. So we're going to create fees calculation. And this is going to be a regular class, a concurrent class, basically, doing the entire calculation. And some information is given to us in here. We know that in order to calculate the fees, the number of courses should be multiplied by the fee rate, whatever it is, either home or the overseas. So you can define them in here first. We can come in here, we can define them both. Final integer home equals to 600. Final integer overseas equals to 2000. This is given to me in the question. I didn't make them up. Look, it's given in there. So I have also the other ones, which is called number of fees and total fees. So 3 more variables. Integer total fees equals to 0. Integer current fee, you can call it current fee, 0. And integer number of courses, which is 0. And remember that whenever you create the variables, they are always what? Private. Don't forget to write this, because otherwise they will make public and be accessible. Now that you have defined this private, we can define the constructor. This is where object-oriented programming comes in very, very handy. You need to understand that each time you type these things, from now on, you have to separate the business logics from how the data is displayed, which means the user interface. Okay, so how do we do this? We're going to create a constructor here and make sure that the constructor takes that information. So we're going to type fees calculation and take the information from the user. Now, in order for this user to calculate their fees, they have to enter number of courses and their status for either home or overseas. We can put the status as a string if you want. And we can also put the number of courses in here. Integer number of courses. Now, whenever you take that information, we need to somehow make sure that this is going to match. We can immediately set up the number of courses. We can say that number of courses, the one that belongs to the class, equals to the number of courses here, which means that the one that you pass as a parameter would go in there and the class will be initialized to that. As for the status, you need to look up what the value is. We can look up this through equals, any word for you, which means it's going to match it. If the status dot equals the home, which is the home status for the user, then the fees, the current fees, will be home. Else if the status equals to overseas, then the current fee will be overseas. You can also check up an error here if you want to, although it's completely optional. It is possible that you display an error. But I'm not going to show an error because if something is wrong, it will take it as 0, because that's why I initialize it as 0. So now that this part is done, we can create a method to calculate the total fees. So we can call it calculate total fees. And the total fees will be very straightforward. Total fees initially, this number of courses multiplied by this current fee. You don't even have to type this in here because the green one refers to the class variable. And you can also return this. It's going to be displayed, and that's going to be anything. So you see, I separated the entire calculation for fees from this display of information. So the reason for this is I'm not going to mix them. I'm going to handle them in separate places. So the way that the calculations are done, it's going to be separated from the way that it is displayed. So how do we do this? First, we go in here into the fees UI and look up to the submit button. Any error messages should be handled in here. So if a user, for example, did not choose home radio or overseas radio, or they did not type their name and so forth, this is where it should be handled. We can create another form, function, and call it Boolean is validated, just to check if everything is validated. And I'm going to create a Boolean value, validated true. And I'm going to only submit this if is validated is true. All the operations about is validated is going to happen only if it is true. This means only if the values are all valid, the form is going to run. And in here, I'm going to do every single operation about how the validation is going to be done. So the first thing I'm going to check is the name text, which is here. You can come in here, name text dot get text dot length less than 1. If that's the case, then we have to display an error message. We're gonna show something like pane, show message dialog. Can leave it as this, doesn't matter. Display the error message. Type your name. Error. And pane, error message. Just maximizing this. Name is validated. What about the second one? When you look it up, we have home and overseas. One of them should be selected. Else if home radio is selected equals to false, and put an and, overseas radio is selected is also false, which means both of them are not selected. Then I have to have an error message as well. I have to kind of like force the user to select either the overseas or the home selection. And we're gonna put it in here as well. We're gonna say the same error message, just change the content. Select either home or overseas. Now that you have done this, make sure to return the is validated to false, because the form is no longer validated. There's an error there, so all this information is not going to run anymore. What else do I have to make sure that is there? Number of courses. So we come in here, else if, can use the same pattern in here, exactly the same thing. Just instead of name text, we're going to say number of courses. Type number of courses. And basically that's it. That's all we had to do. The fees text one, the one that is going to show us the fees text, you can make this a non-editable form, so we can make it like at fees text, just here, fees text, set editable false. Now all this stuff that I have in here, checking the validation, and when you are done with it, if this validation is false, it means there is an error. If there is nothing wrong, which it stays true, which then you can do the rest of the operation. Let's try to run this thing if our logic is going to work. So I'm going to run this application and I'm going to submit, and nothing happens because we haven't attached the buttons yet. So I have to go and make sure that these are done, to make sure that the action performed is actually attached to the submit button. So let's attach them. Submit and clear. It's here. Try to run it. And it says type your name. I have to type my name now. I type my name. And it says select either home or overseas. Now, if I don't select one of them, it will keep popping up the same message. And then it says type number of courses. Now, when I type everything correctly, it no longer is giving an error message, and it will calculate the total fee, which is going to be our next step. So I came here now, everything is done, all the error messages are displayed. What is the next step? The next step is to pass this information to the fees calculation so that it can be calculated. But we need to make sure that the number of courses is actually a number. So we're going to use a try and catch here. So this is kind of like a very good exercise covering up everything we covered so far. Everything that we have seen in this lecture, you can see that it's there. Like try, catch, the UI components, everything that you see so far, basically you can exercise them in one question. And we're going to display this error message here, telling the user that type a number to number of courses. To make sure that they are going to type a number there. And if they don't type it, then you get an error message. So I'm going to define the number here, integer, no of courses, initially 0, and no of courses going to be integer dot parse integer this number of courses text dot get text. Now, if the user doesn't type a number here, they will see another error message in there. Even if everything is correct, like you see, I type my name, I select this, but then in here, I did not type the number. I type letters, and it will say type a number to number of courses. So unless I type a number, you see it gives me an error. And when I type an actual number, like 2, it doesn't give the error message anymore. So we have done every single thing that can be checked with the application. So now in the try and catch part, you can create your object. Our class name is called fees calculation, and that's where we're going to create it. Fees calculation, my fees equals to new fees calculation. Now we have to pass 2 information here. One of them is the status, which we don't know which one the user selected. So we can filter that information in here. We can come in here, type string status, initially empty. And we can check it out. We can say that if the home one is selected, home radio is selected, then status will be home. And if the opposite is selected, which is the overseas, this will be overseas. Overseas radio, right? Yeah. So first one will be, as you can see from the template, is the status. I'm going to type status here. And the second one is the number of courses, which is the number of courses in there. So I'm going to copy paste all this information there. Status and number of courses. Now that this information came in here, it filters that information and you can calculate it. You can come down now and say my fees dot calculate total fee. Now it will calculate it, but it will never display it. So we need to make sure this is displayed. We can say fees text dot set text. So display my fees of calculate and put a $sign at the end so that we can see the information in terms of dollars. So everything is done. So basically what we did in here, first we validated the fields. If everything is valid, we made sure that the data is in terms of number. We found the home or overseas, then calculated and displayed. So no calculation is actually done in here. You see, there is no actual calculation. All calculations are done in a separate class. which means we are separating how the data is calculated from how it is displayed. So whenever I run this application now, everything is validated and everything works. So I just type home, number of courses. If I type letter there, it doesn't accept it. But if I type a number, let's say I take only 2 courses, then it will say 2 times home and display me the number. And if you remember from the application, the home was 600. So 600 by 2 is 1200 or 1200. If we select overseas, that should be 4000. So let's go and select overseas, submit, and that should be 4000. You see the application runs perfectly fine. And you manage to separate the GUI with validation from how data is calculated. Did you understand this? This is a very important exercise, and it is this type of question that you're going to see in your final exam. Did you understand how it is handled? Is it clear? Okay, very good. I'm going to stop in here because I think this was the last exercise of this specific chapter. Yeah, it was. So today we've seen multiple forms, classes, some of the drag and drop and features I managed to put them in the last lecture. We saw auxiliary classes and layered architecture. So going into the next chapter, which is chapter 7, I'm going to just describe you what this chapter is about and stop. And in the next lecture, we're going to focus more on this specific features in this chapter. So far we have been doing the GUI components, how we calculate these things, how we display data, stuff like that. In this chapter, we're going to focus more on the object-oriented principles. One of them is called the UML, which is the UML means that Unified Modeling Language, and we're going to see how this is going to be displayed. So that's the focus of the chapter. Just to clarify, as from this exercise, what is a class and what is a template? A class is basically a template, as I told you today, or a blueprint for making an object, just like in the car example that I gave you. It is a way to structure your components. A class can be considered as a factory for making the object themselves. Where when you look at the object, an object is an entity. It basically uses the behavior of the class and it makes it more specialized, make it an actual entity, a brand you can call. So a good example to this is the class car. You have different type of cars, but every one of them has some common features. So the template itself can be called the class, but each entity is then an object. Objects are more or less the material entities, like I gave you in the example. When you say the concept of a car, you basically refer to some idea in your mind, but you don't know what car it is. It can be a Mercedes, BMW, Opel, whatsoever. So when you brand it, when you make it more material, then it becomes an object. And UML class diagram is an ideal way to show this interactions in object-oriented programming. There are 5 different diagrams under UML umbrella, and if you're going to take a software engineering class, you're going to see them in much more detail. But what you need to know now in this course is called the class diagram. The class diagram is specifically designed for object-oriented programming, and its purpose is to basically show you how you can form these classes. They're usually driven into the 3 important parts, where you have the class name, and this can refer to an abstract class, an interface, the concrete class that we are using. Underneath that, we have the attributes, which can refer to variables, objects, collections, and anything related to those categories. And finally, operations, where the methods are displayed. So the method themselves will give you an idea of what that class can do. Class can also have relationships like one-to-many or many-to-one. And most of the time, this is the type of relationship you're going to see in a class. It's going to be either many-to-one, one-to-many, or in very rare cases, you're going to see many-to-many, which then probably you will need another class. These will also be established through interactions and also inheritance relationships. So in the next chapter, for example, we're going to see that a class can have a child class, which then it means they can always have many-to-one relationship because one class can have many child, but a child can only have one parent. Just to show you an example of a UML class diagram is that at the top you type your class name, all the variables, objects, whatsoever, while everything is listed on the attribute section, and finally you can put the methods. You will realize that some of these has minus and the others have plus. This refers to the modifier. Whenever you see a minus, it means that it is private. Whenever you see a plus, it means it is public. All these symbols represent something. There, for example, can be a public attribute, which is a very rare case, but it can happen, with coming up with a default value in the class. And you basically type it like that. So the name of the variable, the column, the type, and equals to whatever default value itself. And if you have a return type for your data, you can also put operation parameters as many as you can, and then the return type. If you go up, you see that style being followed. So if you have an amount of the float data type, this is an actually private float amount. And the second one, for example, this one is public get title, and the data type is string. So it's going to be public string get title. So they are using a generic pseudocode template. It's not Java specific because you can use a UML class diagram for any object-oriented language. It doesn't have to be Java. It can be completely something else, okay? So that is why the language it is using a generic template. So it will make sense to all languages. And in a typical class diagram, the name of the variable is written first, the data type is indicated later. So when you read it, the above line indicates that the class has a title variable of the string data type. The same goes for every single one of them. Class also include get and set methods. These are not specifically defined because every single get and set method is written down in the same way. So you can see get and set. The set one always sets the value, and the get one always get the current value. The modifier themselves are also listed in here. So as I told you, plus indicates public, minus indicates private. The dash one, the hashtag, indicates protected, which we're going to see in the next lecture. This sign, the visibility, indicates the package, and the underline indicates the static modifier. We don't use this one often. I have never seen it actually, so you can omit that one. But the four of them are quite oftenly used. There are also some differences in here that you might see. For example, an italic representation can represent the class as an abstract class, and all caps represents, for example, a constant value. And if you put this sign in the middle, it might represent that this class is a child class. So child parent. So in this example, look at that. Bank account 1 is actually a child of bank account. And bank account 2 is also a child of bank account. So it means that one class is actually a child of another. You will understand this better when we go to the inheritance part. But just for you to know, to define the UML class diagram, you need to read these symbols, because sometimes these are the symbols that you're going to see in most applications, most representations, such as a plus represents public. So this is public string name, protected integer row, private string section. Public void display. When there is no return type, it's always void. Private void add. Private void added. Protected void delete. Be careful how to read them because it will basically help you to form your classes. Now I'm gonna stop in here. In the next exercise, we're gonna look into more of these things, how we can structure them, how we can display this information better. We're gonna discuss more on get and set methods and go into the inheritance part, which is gonna be our next chapter. So in the upcoming lecture, I'm gonna focus on more on the object and class relationships and also inheritance. So we have like 3 different chapters and we're going to finish the course. So maximum 3 weeks and we'll be done. I will also announce your second project this week. So come back to Moodle tomorrow or the day after tomorrow to see the second project. So the first one, you already submitted it. It's done. Well done. Good job. I saw that a lot of people submitted it. And the second one, I'm going to announce it this week and give you roughly around 10 days or 14 days to finish it. And you're going to do a submission for it as well. And then finally, you will have a final exam, which is going to be 1 or 2 questions that you have to type in Java and solve it online. We have done almost 2 hours non-stop, right? We didn't give a break. Almost 2 hours I'm talking to you non-stop. So I'm gonna stop in here. Before I end my lecture, did you understand today's lecture? Do you have any questions you would like to ask? Somebody asked me about the final exam. Like I said, when the time comes, we need to discuss this. It's too early now. I like to focus on finishing the subjects first, then we'll have to discuss the final exam, okay? And if you come forward and talk to me, explain yourself better, we can come to an agreement. One of the complaints that I have with you is you never talk to me. It is important to communicate, guys, in the lectures, so we come to understanding. I am not a dictator. I don't like to impose things to you. I like to discuss with you. So we are on the same level, okay? I'm not like do this, do that kind of lecturer. I like to find out what is going to work for you. So you have to discuss sometimes about these things and talk, not only write, okay? So please be more participative. Make sure that to follow the lectures. This will be recorded, so you will be able to watch it, okay, on the channel that I put. So watch it again, and we'll meet next week on Monday again. Have a lovely day, and I'll see you next week. Take care.